Can Ole Miss utilize the tight end position again? It hasn't been done since 2016. That was when Evan Ingram, who's now with the New York Giants, was still the tight end of Ole Miss. Brian Scott Rippey, Sudu Upadhyay here for the Ole Miss Spirit. Brian, we've talked about this for the last couple of days. I think in your words, you said it was criminal how underutilized the tight end position was under Matt Luke at Ole Miss.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's Phil Longo, Dawson Knox not scoring a touchdown his entire career, he scores one in high school and his next comes in the NFL. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work.
As a rookie.
Yeah. Last year, I did, as I've said, I feel like 10 times on these fireside chats or whatever you want to call these, that the passing game was such a disaster as a whole schematically last year. It's kind of like, well, what can you expect? It's not only like the tight end wasn't the only thing underutilized. Every single receiver not named Elijah Moore was underutilized. So it appears that's changing, right? You have the reigning Mackey Award winner, Harrison Bryant. Lane Kiffin used him a ton last year, 65 receptions, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. You would think that's going to translate to some degree over here. I have not actually looked at how Jeff Levy used the tight end last year, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was more than how Ole Miss used the tight ends last year. So it appears like it's changing. It's just, do they have the personnel to do it? Because they do lose their top 2 tight ends from a year ago.
Yes, they do. Jason Pellerin converted from a quarterback to a tight end, and of course Octavius Cooley, who was supposed to be the next in line at Ole Miss after Evan Ingram, never really panned out. Both those guys are gone, and actually Cooley didn't have a touchdown a season ago. Pellerin did. So 1 touchdown a year for a tight end since 2016. But you bring up Lane Kiffin and just his history. I mean, you look back at USC 01, he started as an assistant there as a tight ends assistant coach. You talk about Levy. I think Levy's offense is really balanced. The tight end doesn't seem to be a major part of it, but I know he can work that into it, just having watched some of him at UCF. But, you look at the tight ends coach, Joe John Finley, and what he was able to do. One, as a player, I mean, I think he was at Oklahoma when they won the Big 12 championship a few times. He played in the NFL for a few years, and as an assistant coach, he's honestly proven to be one of the better tight end coaches in the country. I mean, you look at the work at Missouri. I don't know if you guys remember Alberto, whose last name I'm not even going to try to attempt saying, at Missouri. I mean, he was a Mackey Award finalist. He was amazing. And then you look at the work he did at Texas A&M last season. Jalen Wiedermeyer, he was a freshman All-American, 32 receptions, 447 yards, and a team-high 6 receiving touchdowns. So Joe John Finley knows how to feature a tight end in an offense. And then Harrison Bryant, I mean, he was the best tight end in the country. He was named a Mackey Award winner last season. That's at FAU. You know what I mean? That was in the Conference USA. The Lane Kiffin was able to do that with a tight end. So a lot of good pieces in terms of coaching there to develop the next great tight end at Ole Miss if that's to happen. It's going to be interesting because you have Kenny Yaboa, who's the Temple transfer. He had decent numbers, 5 touchdowns, around 20 receptions a season ago. And then after that, it gets a little thin and it's a little undetermined. Chase Rogers, great prospect coming out of high school in Mississippi. He ended up going to Louisiana Lafayette, but then ends up transferring to Ole Miss. We don't really know much about him. He didn't play much at ULL. He can just kind of go off of what he did in high school. And then, of course, Chad Kelly's little brother, Casey Kelly, who, seems to be just as athletic as, you'd expect a tight end to be. I know he played lacrosse in high school, played football. It seems to be a tough kid, and I think they're already saying he's a bit of a leader among his age group there. So, and then after that, it's like Jonathan Hess, who's a former linebacker, and then Devon Penniman, who, I just hope he finishes his Ole Miss career without an injury. So that's kind of the rundown on what we have.
Yeah, I mean, after you're counting obviously heavy on Kenny Yaboa, you go get him as a grad transfer. Obviously, he's going to try to play immediately. Like, it was an immediate need they needed. Matt, you don't know a whole lot about Chase Rogers, as you mentioned, was injured last year, so didn't really play at all. Transfers, you've got Alex Feniel. I'm not really sure what to expect there. A nice body size. I mean, 6'6", 230. And then, as you mentioned, Devon Penniman, not sure what's left in the tank at this point. Made the position switch out of necessity last year, and there's too many running backs that they had that can contribute. But, yeah, right. I mean, you're leaning hard on Kenny Yaboa, and then what kind of develops behind him will actually be interesting. I imagine it'll be Chase Rogers. You also have Nick Haynes there, a senior that's been around for a couple of years. But really after that, it gets kind of dicey. So you're definitely counting on Yaboa to kind of be the guy, if there's such thing as the guy at tight end.
Yeah, and it feels like Yaboa maybe meets that at least what we saw Harrison Bryant do to a degree. Now, Bryant, as you know, he's 7 touchdowns. That's great for a tight end. But he was amazing as an H-back. They put him in the slot. Just blocking, man. All these blocking schemes at FAU, I just have been studying up on kind of how he was used. And he was an all-around tight end. He fits the description of a true tight end. I mean, he can go out and catch the balls for you. But honestly, he made a lot of things work for their ground game, pass protection. He was pretty great at that. Same with Kenny Yaboa. I've got an interesting stat. He did not allow a single sack in pass protection in 2019. And this is a kid who, coming out of high school, was like a 2-star. I think he played a little on defense, played a little on offense, didn't really have a true position. And in his time at Temple, turned into what you would consider a prototypical tight end. Now, you would think that, he's a grad transfer, he's a little bit older, but you would think that under Lane Kiffin and Joe John Finley and this offense that he would take the next step. That's what they want him to. But based on what he did at Temple, it's encouraging for what he could provide for Ole Miss.
Yeah, not a very high bar set, at least from years past, right? Like if you're setting an over-under on touchdown catches, you're probably at 2.5 for him next year? Or maybe if you want to be in position as a whole, 3.5. I'll say 3. Over. Yeah, I'll go over. Why not? 3. That's about where you'd probably set the over-under at. Kind of that seems fair, but it'll be interesting. Can they kind of command the middle of the field? Because you have Elijah Moore in the slot. You really don't know what you kind of have around him on the outside. They got, as we've mentioned before talking about it, like they've got some interesting prospects on the outside. You just don't really know what they are yet at this point in their career. So tight end could actually become really, really important for them this year.
Absolutely. And that, like I said, I think that's one of the biggest things for me is I'm not just talking about an extra receiver. I'm talking about a guy that does it all. That's what a tight end does. You know what I mean? And it seems like Yaboa can fit that for Ole Miss. And especially with the way the guys, Joe John Finley and Lane Kiffin, the way they've coached guys in the past, they coach guys to be all around tight ends, true tight ends. That's why Harrison Bryant is in the NFL now. He's going to be making, NFL money.
Sure. And the tight end's a position that kids can come out of quote unquote nowhere and kind of become a contributor kind of from off the radar, because you don't really recruit very many true tight ends out of high school, right? Like tight ends are usually kids that ended up maybe on defense, or they're a tweener offensive lineman that didn't really have a position. I'm kind of thinking Michael Howard, the kid that had to play left tackle a little bit for him last year, kind of the tweener size. So, I mean, in terms of whatever's behind Yaboa, you don't really know, but it wouldn't shock me if someone from off the radar kind of came along, because, again, there's just really not very many cookie cutter tight ends coming out of high school. It's kind of a position you develop within your program in college.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't get many. I think you had one this past season who I think went to LSU, was like the Gatorade Player of the Year in Georgia. So you don't get a lot of guys like that all the time. You're absolutely right. All right. So if we're talking, I know you said over under 3.5, 2.5 probably, but if we're talking about the role of the tight end of one of these guys in the Ole Miss offense this year, what do you think is realistic to expect? What should we expect from one of these guys?
I'm in my mind kind of going through numbers. It's 400-ish yards and 3.5 touchdowns. Is that fair? That's fairly productive.
That's fair.
And putting it like 25, 30 catches probably. It's a hell of a lot more production than they have been getting. So I think that's probably a reasonable number to try to get to, somewhere in that range, 3.5, 4 touchdowns, something like that. It's kind of what I had in mind.
It's going to be exciting to see how Lane Kiffin and Joe John Finley and co. Utilize the tight end this year for Ole Miss. Remember, guys, to follow the Ole Miss Spirit, subscribe if you want some exclusive content, some great stuff coming your way as we gear for hopefully what will be a 2020 season that will start on time. And so remember, guys, to keep up with that. Keep up with Brian on Twitter as well. Brian, what's your Twitter, man? Shout it out.
At BS Rippey, very creatively crafted. RIPPE.
BS Rippey. He's got some fire that he's going to be dropping soon. He's working on some good pieces. You guys should follow him. You can follow me at Suda Upadea if you want. OleMissSpirit.com. Sorry, OMSpirit.com. For Brian, I'm Sudu. We'll see you guys next time.